Hi, and welcome to another episode of PDA-UK. In this episode, I'm going to be looking at sensory processing disorder, specifically what sensory processing disorder is and how it fits in with autism. So as I say, welcome back to PDA-UK. Before we go on any further, go to the usual thing, hit like, hit subscribe, and make sure you ring the bell so that we know when you've got new content coming up, loads of good stuff coming up. As I say, this episode is about sensory processing disorder. Now, this is something that we've spoken about before on the channel, in that we talked about interoception, proprioception, and the vestibular system, and even looked at polyvagal theory and how that can relate. But what I realised we haven't done is actually really looked at what sensory processing disorder is and how it affects the lives of the people who have it. So that's what we're going to do. So what is sensory processing disorder? Very commonly, it's co-diagnosed with autism. So if you're an autistic person, you may have a co-diagnosis of sensory processing disorder, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, one of those many things, PDA, that can come and follow and ties in with autism. However, it's also its own thing. And I think with all these things, that's the case. For whatever the case may be and how often they're associated with autism, they're also their own thing, and they have their own specific role within a person's world and a person's life. So my daughter is diagnosed with sensory processing disorder. Part of her autism diagnosis was that she has sensory processing issues. And it presents in very different ways with different people. And basically, so we've talked before about the fact that all autism is really just a different way of processing the world. And that's valid in its own way. And so many amazing people have become amazing people because of the fact that they have an autistic mind that is able to process things in a different way and sees other things that, you know, myself as neurotypical wouldn't see. So we talked to Em, who is a good friend of mine, who runs a business doing jewelry making and art, basically. And the stuff that she comes up with is incredible, and she sees this stuff just in general life around her, and she sees it because her brain just processes the world around in a different way, and she gets this sort of hyper focus on microchasms and all that kind of stuff, and it's just amazing. And the stuff she produces is astonishing because of her brain. Basically, because that brain just works differently, sometimes it can trigger into not interpreting things in the way it maybe originally intended to be. And so this is definitely apparent for my daughter. So my daughter's very sensitive to smells. If I'm eating a Scotch egg, which I'm quite fond of, if I'm eating a Scotch egg, she can't stand the smell of the egg itself, something in it she can't deal with. But it's specifically within a Scotch egg. If I was to have fried eggs on a sandwich, she wouldn't care. There's something about the combination of the smell of the meat and the smell of the egg means for my daughter that she can't stand it. She has to leave the room. She does it with things like, my son loves quavers. And when he eats a pack of quavers, she has to leave the room. She can't stand it, or she'll kick off because she just can't stand being in the room near that smell. And it can translate in so many different ways for different people. So we often talk about the fact that a lot of autistic people struggle with bright lights or chaotic lights, lots of sounds, certain textures and certain feels. And basically the brain's processing this input, but processing it in a way that is either painful or not painful enough. Now that may sound sort of almost like opposites attract, but it's actually true. An example I'd give is the sensation of something that is, you know, like a label in a t-shirt. I have a label on my t-shirt. It doesn't bother me at all. It's just there. I don't even notice it. For my daughter, if she has a label, it drives her mad. It's painful to her. Her brain actually processes it in a painful way. It's almost like it's chafing her. It's constantly irritating on the skin. The nerves in her skin are communicating the sensation of the label to her brain, but the brain is processing in a way that says, this is uncomfortable, I don't like it. It amps up the pain in an effort to stop it, basically. So we cut the labels out and there's no longer an issue. We get it with loads of things. Socks are a fantastic example, and so many parents who have autistic kids will know this one. The sensation of a sock, if the seam's in the wrong place, if it has a seam at all, the height of the sock, the tightness of the sock, all these things, it can mean the difference between a sock going straight on and not even thought about, or an hour and a half of trying to get your kid in school socks so that we can get in school on time and being late again and having to explain, sorry, it was the socks. You know, it's something that happens quite frequently. My daughter wears the same clothes consistently, so she won't wear clothes that feel any different to what she is used to. And if they are different, so when something's worn out and we have to replace it, we have to go through a period of adjustment to get into something else. And that's just the way she is. She likes those same things. We wash the same things every night. She goes to school in clean clothes, but they're always exactly the same ones. Even a replacement, so she has, the embroidered t-shirts that give the name of the school. And even if it's a different shirt of the same type with the same logos, everything's the same brand, same everything. The difference is noticeable immediately. It smells different. It has a different sort of feel to it. It's not been quite worn in yet, so it's a bit maybe rougher or maybe softer. All these things have this input, and that can really play into the painful experience that can be with sensory processing disorder. On the opposite end of that, we have the undersensitive side. And this can mean that, and we've experienced this as well, certain things that for me would be painful, my daughter wouldn't even register. And that can be really bad. Understanding heat and, the fact that heat is going to burn. It took a long time for my daughter to get her head around because she doesn't really feel it that way. Something's happened, and this is an interesting thing. I mean, this may just be my daughter, but something I do know is that it's triggered the other way now. She's now, somehow her brain's processed that heat is bad equals, injury. And it becomes oversensitive to that. So if she's too cold or too hot now, she's immediately aware of it. Where previously she wouldn't have cared if she'd have gone out in winter in a vest and underpants, and she'd have been quite happy, wouldn't have noticed the snow and doesn't care. Now it's the opposite. It's like, is it going to be cold? I need to be prepared. The mental preparation has to go into it. It's almost like her brain's overcompensating, having learned the lesson, if you like. So it's really challenging, and it's really challenging for her. And of course it triggers anxiety. And, as we've talked about on probably almost every episode we've done, the link with autism and anxiety is just intrinsic. They go together hand in hand. And it's that trigger of anxiety. If something's not the way it should feel for her, it's not right. It triggers the anxiety, and that leads to the challenging behaviors that we often experience. So it's about managing her sensory overload. And the sensory overload can come in so many ways. She loves soft play. She loves going to soft play. She loves playing. She loves running around. But as time goes on, you can see it wearing on her, the constant noise. There's a soft play near us that we sometimes go to that she really loves. It's the bigger of the soft plays around us. But they've got the game machines in there, and it's like the lights dinging all the time. There's music playing. There's sort of bright lights and colours. There's all this kind of chaos around, aside from the kids who are running around screaming and having a good time, enjoying themselves. There's this sense of absolute, just chaos within there. It's not, you never go to a soft play for a quiet coffee. You know what I mean? There's a reason people don't hold business meetings at soft plays. It just wouldn't work. It's just too much, and you can't hear yourselves think, and it's not conducive to that environment. So, it's just something that goes along with it. But after a while, it really plays on my daughter, and you can see her getting triggered into her more challenging behaviors because the sensory overload is building. Christmas is something, and birthdays, that we really have to pay attention to, because the overall sensory overload, Christmas is just the best example, because we're coming up to it now, and it's just starting, the advertising's kicking in, and there's an excitement. Christmas is exciting. Oh, what am I going to get this year? What's Santa going to bring me? Are we going to decorate the house? And suddenly, you've got Christmas decorations going up, and the same Christmas music starts playing that little bit louder in all the shops, and they've got decorations up, and then the Christmas lights go up in the town, and they're blinking and they're shining, and there's more people about because people are Christmas shopping, and all this is incremental. But over that couple of months before Christmas, it really builds, and by the time you've hit Christmas, it's just all there. And we talked before about the emotional cup. We all have this inside us that is able to cope and deal with our lives, and it might fill up, and it can be positive or negative. We might have really exciting, happy things like Christmas, but it still fills that cup. And it means that the ability to regulate the emotion gets more challenging the more it fills up. For my daughter, her anxiety is that high that it's constantly full. It's very full, very close to full. And it only takes something small, and it all spills over, and that's when we get meltdowns and challenging behaviours. When you've got the external input being amped up all that way, it's even less, space at the top of that cup for it to be able to manage it. you're going to get more challenging behaviours that continue. And it all comes down to this sort of sensory processing. And it can be very dangerous in some ways. And this is something we as parents have to really watch out for. For some kids, their stimming may be rocking, and it may get to the point that they like the sensation of perhaps something bumping their head. It can be quite pleasant, you know, getting the head massages, all that kind of stuff. But often the head banging goes on beyond, and it can get to the point where it's a physical risk to the person who's head banging. And, you know, it's a form of stimming that I say you shouldn't ever stop people stimming unless it's self-injurious or potentially harmful to somebody else. And then you divert it, hopefully, to a different stim that is just a healthier stim, and it's not going to cause them any harm in themselves. But that sensory processing order at play as well. The brain isn't processing the pain input. If I bang my head too hard, ow, you know, and I'll run around and I'll be annoyed that I've banged my head. You know, you get the whole little dance that you get with the my head. My daughter wouldn't necessarily get that. She does, but there are kids that won't. They won't get that input, and it can actually be quite a pleasant sensation. So again, the brain's misinterpreting this input of sense, if you like, but it's misinterpreting it as this is actually pleasurable to me when it can actually be physically harmful. And pain's something that's really important. And I think this is what, to understand the risk with sensory processing disorder in this way, it's to understand the necessity of pain. Now, we all live, I especially live to avoid pain wherever I can. You know, I did one of these personality tests yonks ago, and one of the key things was I avoid pain. I will always try and take the most comfortable possible route. The irony being my life is just complex now, and what can you do? But I will always try and take the simplest route, the most comfortable route, and I will avoid discomfort or pain at any cost. Pain is something that is designed in our bodies to tell us when something's not right. So if a kettle's hot and I go reach out and touch it, the pain, the nerves in my hand send pain sensations to my brain. It's a reflex. Actually, it doesn't think it even makes the brain. It just does a whip around in your nerves and you get a reflex reaction. But your brain processes that as that's painful, that's hot. Do not do that again. Pain is needed. Pain is the sensation that tells us when something is wrong. People who have leprosy, there was a doctor by the name of Dr. Paul Brandt who did a lot of research into the sort of leper colonies in developing countries. And what he was able to determine was that where people think leprosy is, it's about sores and things falling off and you know, which is associated, he actually discovered it's not that, it's actually a deadening of the nerves. The reason bits are falling off is because in these developing countries where they don't enjoy the same sanitary conditions that we do, there are rats. And if your nerves in your hand aren't telling you that a rat's gnawing at it, then you don't wake up to stop it. And so bits fall off and you get sores because you get bed sores because you're not getting the body telling you need to roll over because your nerves aren't playing that game. So pain is really important. You take pain away, you don't know when something's wrong. So pain is an incredibly important feature in our lives. It's necessary. The reason we all try to avoid pain is because it's unpleasant. And it's unpleasant because it's telling us something is wrong. So if the brain isn't processing pain in the correct way, it's not telling us this is going to hurt you, then that can lead to issues. And that's where we lead to these sort of more self-injurious forms of stimming and stuff like that. It can be, it's you know, very, very complex, and it's having to sort of retrain the brain in some ways. This is what we do, you know, what's happened with my daughter completely accidentally, that she's gone from not caring about pain sensation from heat or cold to over caring. So it's, like I say, it's flipped completely the other way, but it's there, and at least that's there now. So she's hyper aware of it, but that's a good thing in that she's not going to get herself in a situation now where she's going to get hypothermia or burn. You know, it's that simple. That's really what sensory processing disorder is. It's understanding that the brain is processing the outward sensations. And we talked in previous episodes, we talked about the, you know, interoception and proprioception and the vestibular system, and they're well worth watching a lot more detail in that. But basically, we've got nerves outside our body. We've also got senses inside our body. And if the brain's not understanding them correctly, then it's going to lead to issues. So the issue of texture of food is actually related to interoception. So it's our inside, and it's not liking the texture of food, and so we don't eat that certain food. And for people who are autistic and experiencing this, it means that you can get a very limited diet. My daughter eats pretty much 3 things. She'll, pizza, nuggets and chips, and that's about it. And we keep challenging her to sort of try new things, but it's very difficult. But it's because it's different. It doesn't feel right to her, and so her body rejects it. I'm not interested. Her mind's going, not having it. That's where sensory processing disorder comes in from that internal perspective. It can lead to things like even bedwetting. So if your internal senses aren't being processed by the brain correctly and saying, I need to go to the loo now, then it can result with bedwetting. And we went through a long period of it, it took a long time for my daughter to get to the stage where she wasn't wetting herself at night. And again, interesting, this is something that's gone the other way. She's now hyper aware to it. So what's actually happening with my daughter is that she goes to the toilet 7-8 times a night. She gets up the second she's awake. She's like, I need to go to the loo now. Her brain's overcompensated for the fact that it wasn't registering it before. She now recognizes it, and it's suddenly gone the other way. It's all about balance, I guess, and it's finding the balance for her. It's going to be finding that balance in between, and it may never happen. She may just be someone who has to go to the toilet 7 or 8 times a night for the rest of her life, because that's just her way of dealing with the fact that her brain wasn't processing it. Her brain wasn't recognizing that she needed to go quickly enough before. So that's just basically a brief introduction into what sensory processing disorder is and how it can be understood. It's like with so many things that relate to autism or having autistic kids or knowing autistic people. It's about us now meeting our kids, our friends, our relatives, where they're at. So how do we make life simpler in order to help our kids, our friends, our family with sensory processing disorder? For my daughter, it's things like recognizing the environment that we're in, knowing that if we're going shopping, it's going to be a lot busier, it's going to be more people, and there's going to be more things there that are going to potentially trigger her into more challenging behaviors, and learning to adapt in those situations. Keep an eye. If we need to take her somewhere quiet for a while, then we can do that. We've got to be able to do shopping. We've got to be able to buy things. We can get deliveries, and we do frequently get things delivered rather than go to shops. But she enjoys shopping as well. But it's just knowing that there's that sensory overload that can come, and we need to prepare for it. Brief for shopping trips, getting deliveries where we can, making sure that we are just taking care of the little things. As we come up to Christmas, we don't do what we used to do. We would love to have the big Christmas with lots of decorations and the lights flashing. We've learned over time, we don't do that. We put up a couple of decorations. We make it feel Christmassy without overdoing it, because there's so many triggers in there for our kids. For my daughter, it's things are different. They're not as they were. And while it's exciting, it's also just something that creates that level of anxiety, and she struggles to cope with it. We don't put flashing lights anywhere anymore. We don't. If we have a tree, it's a very subtle one. We do have one which has the optical fiber lights, and it's more gentle, but we keep it off most of the time. If she wants to watch it for a little bit, she can turn it on and play with it and enjoy it, but then she's free to turn it off, and she doesn't have to worry about it. It's there. We just try to keep things lower in the excitement. So it's still a really happy time. It's a family time, that she's not at school, she's at home, she's enjoying life. However, it's just making sure that it is enough for her to be able to cope and function. That's pretty much all I've got to say. It's, as I say, a brief introduction into sensory processing disorder, and something we haven't looked at in that kind of way yet. Please do like this, please do subscribe and hit the bell so that you know when we've got new content coming up. And I'd love to hear your feedback. If you've got any tips on how you handle sensory processing disorder as a person, or if you have kids or family or friends who have sensory processing disorder, ways that you've been able to meet them where they're at and adjust ourselves so that we're making their life simpler. I'd love to hear it in the comments. Please do put it in there. I'll see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, stay safe.